This month, we are actually changing how we do things. We are going to focus on one topic all month long. Our topic this month is sensory diet. What is it? How does it benefit our child? We're going to get into all of that this month. But before I get into today's topic, I want to first show you a video from our sponsor, LAKIKID.
Like that. So they can pick what they're feeling that day. It can be flexible. And it wiggles just a little bit. It's not going to make them fall out of their chair or anything crazy. Right? Is it comfortable? It's nice to use even when you're sitting at the computer yourself. So yeah, they can still do handwriting and all that seated work that they're supposed to do. All right, you want to show them the big one? And then there are other days when kids just have a lot of needs. A lot of vestibular needs for movement, a lot of proprioceptive needs. I also like this wiggle seat because it engages the core. To keep yourself stable, the child it doesn't look like they're doing much, but he's using all those muscles in his back and in his abs to keep himself upright. And a lot of kids struggle with core strength. So you can be developing their core strength while they're also developing their handwriting or doing their math tables. Pretty neat, also very non-disruptive. All right.
Joining us today, I'm really excited that we actually get to break down sensory diet, what it is, and how it can benefit your child. Now, I want to welcome to the show today Matt. He is an occupational therapy assistant, personal trainer, and special education teacher. Matt Sloan has directed his experience into specialized fitness programs for everyone while catering to sensory difficulties, neurodiversity, or any special needs. Matt also brings sensory education and strategies to educators, parents, fitness professionals, and anyone working with the sensory difficulties to provide sensory strategies and create a sensory friendly environment and promote the importance of movement in learning and everyday activities. Matt, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for having me again. Good to be here.
So I really want to talk about what is a sensory diet. It's such a misleading term.
Yeah, so it's got the word it's got the word diet in it, so right away you think of food. And a sensory diet, it's similar to you think of the word diet, you think of food and food you eat and put in your body. It's similar in the sense that your body needs sensory input to kind of function throughout the day, just like you would with food, right? You need to put food in your system in order to function and live. Same thing with sensory input. So that's a sensory diet is essentially, it's kind of a weird term. I like to call it a sensory plan, but it's essentially the same thing. It's understanding your kid's sensory needs and looking at the different environments they are throughout the day and making accommodations and modifications if needed to that environment, while being proactive about giving them that sensory input, sensory activities, and any assistance they might need throughout the day. So being proactive and with giving them that input in order to sustain their attention and avoid negative behavior or unwanted behaviors. That's kind of short term.
I just want to say, folks, if you have a question while we're talking, ask now, and we'll actually incorporate it into the questions and answers that we're doing at the time. So when you come up with a question, folks, ask right away, and that way Matt and I can tackle that while we're still on that topic. So it's not as just messy. It's a little bit neater and easier to follow. So, Matt, who does a sensory diet benefit?
Well, a sensory diet benefits everybody. If you think about it, we all do it anyway. So, for instance, when I get up, I try to exercise, and that's my sensory input. I get my heavy work, and I get moving, and it kind of sets the tone for the next couple hours, right? I feel better. So then my attention's better. That's the same thing as a sensory diet. We're being on the show, we're talking about kids. My son I have a sensory diet for him. I don't do it as much, but a few months ago, when he would get up in the morning, I would make sure we come to the basement and try to get some swinging in or crawling through some Lycra before he got on the bus. And that's what I did at home. And because the bus ride's kind of noisy and that would get him riled up and it's bumpy. So when he gets there, there's a system we worked out with the school. It's called Jump Club. So when he gets off the bus, he can go right to the office and he jumps on the trampoline for a bit before he goes to class. Or right. I think he went to class first and then went to I can't remember the order. But that was available for him throughout the day, as well as use of earphones, noise-canceling headphones, and he sat on a LAKIKID wiggle cushion as well. And then when he would come home, I would make sure we'd go right to doing something active, like do some kind of obstacle course or maybe even swinging. So that was my son's sensory diet. I was giving him movement throughout the day, and it was proactive, in the sense that same thing as, you think of a regular diet. If you're proactive about the foods you purchase, you're usually buy the healthy food. So you're ready. You have you're efficient, you use your coupons. Whereas you're reactive, if you haven't done your food shopping and you didn't get the healthy stuff, you're driving down the street and suddenly you're starving and you pull into McDonald's, and then your body's still getting what it needs, but it's not as good for you. And then kids will do that as well. They, if you're proactive about getting them the sensory input that helps them, a lot of times they'll still seek that input, and it's not always functional. Like my son he's an impact. He's always seeking impact. He likes to bang, 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 bang. So by getting that input in the morning, that decreased that need to do that throughout the day. So if we did miss it that morning or he needed more, he would still seek that input, but it was dysfunctional. He'd interrupt class. It was, he's running into kids in line, putting his hands all over other kids, and then he gets in trouble. So
by having a sensory diet, especially in your son's case, it really kind of pulled him and made it easier for him to function in the classroom because his needs were met. I always say you can't pour from an empty cup. So in essence, every morning you would fill his cup up so that he could make it through the day. Exactly.
Yes. And I love that term, filling his cup up. Sometimes we walk to school and that's filling his cup up. He'd get that motor running and it was enough input, entire amount as well, to get to class.
Oh, yes. And one thing I think that's important to mention is that when the child gets used to it, it is more beneficial, but it can help at different times. Like Riley used to struggle with meal times. Mm-hmm. So if we would do the movements, she's more likely to sit down and eat, because she did the movement before we ate. Mm-hmm. Same with homework. I don't push homework until after she's had a chance to move around, to get some different sensory input to really help her focus again.
Yes, that's a great idea.
I mean, they sit for how many hours a day in class? Even though our teacher does brain breaks, you still need that time. Right, and it's individualized. I think movement breaks are great. I think everybody needs it. But, when you're creating when you start talking about sensory diets or a sensory plan for your kid, it's number one is, you made that plan for your daughter because you understand her sensory needs. And that's step number one, is knowing your kid's sensory needs. So some kids seek input. You've heard the term seekers and avoiders. So kids that seek input are going to look at it. For my son, he seeks tactile input. He seeks impact, and that he's doing that because that's helping him organize his brain so he can bring his level down. So when he's getting up and hitting things, he's seeking that input because he's trying to organize himself. Whereas sometimes kids avoid that certain inputs because it's dysregulating. It doesn't make them feel good. That same son is also, he avoids loud noises. He avoids those. He covers his ears. He definitely doesn't like it. Dysregulates him. He also avoids
sustained pressure. So if I was to put a lot of pressure on him, he doesn't like that. It's too much. So he avoids that. So that's step one into understanding, into making a sensory diet for your kid, is understand their sensory needs. And how do you do that? Well, if you have an OT or someone that knows about sensory, there are assessments you can get. If they're going to OT, they're probably given some sort of either a sensory profile or a sensory processing measure, that are two sensory tests, excuse me, that OTs will administer. And that's kind of this step one in kind of looking at the different systems, that, vestibular sense, visual, auditory, kind of going down the list. And then once you have that, you can kind of understand what your kid is seeking, what they're avoiding. Are they high registration, meaning are they highly sensitive to things? Again, my youngest son is very, he hears a noise, he's right there. He's aware of it all the time. Nothing gets by his ears ever. But or maybe they're low registration, where they don't they're not aware of some input. Like maybe they have food on their face and they're just not aware of that. Just knowing these little pieces of the puzzle helps you kind of build that input. That sensory diet. And then once you kind of have that, then you kind of start looking at their day. You would maybe look at the schedule of the day and look at, for instance, knowing the environment for each part of the day. We'll talk about school because that's really easy. So looking at my son gets on the bus, so knowing that bus is bouncy, it's a lot of movement, it's a lot of visual distractions, it's very loud. Knowing that environment, thinking about what accommodations you can make to that environment, what modifications. So he has earphones he can use if he wants. He has them in his little bag. And then being proactive about the input before that is getting all that movement and to kind of get his body ready. And then when he comes out of the bus, the teachers kind of know to kind of look for signs. Okay, does he need a minute? Is he good to go to school? So just knowing the different demands. Knowing the different environments as well as the demands of the activities going on within that environment, if that makes sense.
Right. Now, something you just said kind of made me think of something. Riley, when she struggles, she gives herself sensory input, and it is in a negative fashion. We're working on changing it, but you can give the wrong kind of sensory input, and it is possible. I mean,
sure.
Riley right now is biting her hands.
Mm-hmm.
That's how she seeks sensory input, and we've moved to jewelry that she can use instead. But one of the key things I think we need to keep in mind is, and you said knowing if your child's a seeker or an avoider, or they could be both. Your son is both. My daughter is both.
Totally. We all are at some point, on some level. Yeah.
Exactly. We all have things we like and we don't like.
And that can also change from day to day as well. When and so we never know. But you get a general sense of it, but keeping your eye on that.
Right. But I want to mention that you want to stay away from negative sensory input.
Well, I think that goes back to being kind of proactive. So when she's biting on her nails, she's trying to regulate herself. So or her fingers. That's more reactive. So she's doing it herself, and that's fine. But that can. We all kind of, some of us, we all have kind of on some level, an oral fixation. Like I chew on my pen a lot, but that can also be dysfunctional, like in your daughter's case. But so being aware of that and looking for those signals before she gets to that dysfunctional modality, dysfunctional activity. So then knowing her and knowing what works for her, then kind of implementing some of those activities. So maybe she has a movement break before she gets to this piece.
Right.
Maybe she gets to wear some headphones, or maybe she gets to. So just being aware of that. So I think it kind of goes to like being intentional about the input during the day before a kid really starts to seek it, and like you said, in a negative fashion or a dysfunctional way.
Exactly. And another thing that I think we should bring up is that you want to be proactive, but you want to teach your child body awareness. And that
Yep.
has a lot to do with the sensory diet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So all input the kid is getting, if you're using sensory strategies, it's all movement based. And as they get, from, I'll use my son again. So I'm gonna use my oldest son, who's kind of the opposite and the total opposite of my youngest son. So he is he's kind of low registration. He's he's such an opposite kid. It's funny. Well, when he reads, he's a hyperlexy. He'll read forever and ever. He's young. He's only 8, but he's reading at a 5th, almost 6th grade level.
Wow.
He'll read forever, and I have to kind of make sure he's getting some movement, because when that book goes down, he goes from 0 to 60. There's no in between. So when he is reading, part of his sensory diet, when he is reading, I try to get him in a beanbag. If I can get him in a swing and he can read, that way he's getting that input. And in that sense here, you're giving body awareness. He's building that awareness of where his body is in space and how it feels. And then when the book is down, he's a little bit less, for the most part, he's a little bit less, if he's going to read for an hour or 2 hours, he's a little bit less chaotic.
Right.
So yeah, so when you all movement and all sensory input, you kind of, a lot of our kids, especially when they're really young, they're developing body sense anywhere and body awareness. And the more input they get, when I'm stagnant and I'm staring at something, I'm not really getting a whole lot of body awareness. So I'm just using my visual sense or my auditory. I'm getting that when I'm getting those physical inputs. That's when I start to kind of build that body scheme, body map, and body awareness. And then then with that comes along regulation and understanding what's going on inside my body and emotions and the whole gamut.
And one thing, like you were saying, your son's a reader. He'll do it for hours. I know some of our kids will be on their iPad for as long as they can get away with. And you can simply use things like our wiggle seat so that even though they're focused on that one thing, the reading, they're still getting the movement and the pressure.
Yeah.
And they just don't know it.
Yeah, exactly. And incorporating, I'm a big advocate for incorporating movement into everything, while knowing your kid. Because sometimes if I'm moving too much, that can send me off. But if you have a kid that is, these are so addictive, and I mean, they're so easy to kind of lose yourself. We all do it. I sit on this phone all day. And then when I put this phone down, I need to go move. So making sure that kids are getting breaks, movement breaks, sensory input, while understanding their individual needs and what's going on around them in the environment. And that's creating your kid's sensory diet.
Exactly. Now, Melissa Cox has a question for us. She wants to know, does this come along with the self-harm? Could my son be missing the sensory input he needs and using self-harm instead?
Yeah, it could be a piece of it. A lot of times self-harm can go along with, it's one way to kind of help them regulate themselves. So, some head banging, that's their way to kind of get their regulation back down. They're getting some sensory input. It can definitely help with reducing that by getting more input throughout the day. Being intentional about the movement and the input can help with that. Because, a lot of times, why are they self-harming? Because they are dysregulated, because they're upset, they're very emotional. And that can stem from trauma, being frustrated, not having control of your emotions. And that's not something you generally can learn really as a young kid, or if you have difficulty with communication or anything like that. But through body sense and body awareness comes the better ability to regulate. And with better ability to regulate comes less frustration. Less frustration can be less self-harm. I hope I explained that. I hope that helps. But yes, in the short answer, yeah, body input, sensory diets can help.
Right. Now, I just want to say real quick, hi, Riley. Riley and my mom are in the other room actually watching us right now. I just got a message saying, hi, mommy. So, hi, Riley. Now, Melissa again asks, Matt, any suggestions on changing the self-harm to a more acceptable sensory input?
Well, that would be something. Is your kid going to OT or working with an occupational therapist? Or I would get with them. They're going to know your kid. I'm sorry. So the question was, what can you do instead of? What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Any suggestions on turning self-harm into sensory input? I think we're going to put that one on the burner for a second, because an important part of this is who is involved in building a sensory diet and executing a sensory diet. And I think once we learn who we can work with, then maybe it'll give Melissa more ideas to turn that negative into a more positive experience.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, so generally when you're making a sensory diet, you're discovering your kid's sensory needs. That's generally done with an occupational therapist. And anyone knowing sensory integration and understanding sensory integration therapy, that's a good person to use. Generally, that's an OT. It doesn't necessarily have to be, and not all OTs are kind of trained in sensory per se, but they're the person to talk to. They're going to know the most generally in your area.
You want to just real quick explain sensory integration? A lot of our parents probably don't understand that word.
Sure. So sensory integration is all your senses kind of working together your senses are integrated. They're all working together to navigate through life, right? So you're walking down the street and the terrain changes. So then your body has to be your visual and your auditory and your proprioception and your vestibular system all have to work together to navigate the world, right? So that's what sensory integration is. When it comes to kids with sensory difficulties, and most people on the autism spectrum, sensory processing disorder, a lot of neurodiversities struggle with a sensory difficulty. The senses aren't wired the way most people's are wired. They're wired differently. So their senses aren't working the way we're supposed to. So movement can be dysregulating. They may not have a lot of body sense, so they go out and seek that, or sound is too much, touch is too much, or not enough. So their systems are not working. So sensory integration therapy is something generally in OT practices, and it's a method created by Jean Ayres in, I want to say, the late 70s, early 80s. I can't quite remember the date. Anyway, so it's a way in which using kind of the basic senses and movements and sensory input to help get the nervous system to a regulated place and build body awareness and be okay with what's going on here, so then you can move on to higher cognitive activities, if that makes sense.
So I just want to reiterate, folks, that the sensory input, it does have a neurological aspect to it. Because, I mean, if you want to explain that a little more, Matt.
Well, I mean, your sensory systems are the first things to develop, in utero. It's your tactile, your vestibular sense, your proprioception, movement of my head, the feeling I get from my muscles and my joints, the tactile I get from the outside pressure on the outside. These are all things that develop in utero, and as I come out, I now have to explore the world, and if there's something going on with those senses, that means I'm interpreting the world a little differently, and I'm going to react a little differently, and that might look like things like self-harm or withdrawal or seeking other input. So yeah, it's at your brainstem. I mean, it's the base of all of us, our sensory systems. I find it's extremely important. A lot of times it's overlooked.
Now back to who can we work with to set up a sensory diet? Of course, we can work with OT. We've discussed that. Brenda would like to know if ABA can help with a sensory diet.
ABA is more of a cognitive approach. I don't know that many ABA therapists that some have an idea of sensory. If someone has an idea of what sensory actually is and how it works and how it applies to behavior, I would say, talk to them. I would consult I'm going to go with I'm a CODA. I'm an occupational therapy assistant, so I'm going to say go to the OT first. But they're generally the ones that are trained in sensory. There might be an ABA therapist. Just because I'm an ABA therapist doesn't necessarily mean I don't know anything on sensory, but right. I find it's more in the OT realm.
Now, I just want to put this out there, folks. I'm seeing these questions. I want to let you all know that this whole month, we have 4 weeks of shows between me and Matt. So if we don't get your question today, or if you come up with another question that you need to ask, Matt will be with us again next week. I will get more in depth on sensory diet. Week 3, Matt will come back and he will actually show us different things that we can use for sensory diet. And then week 4, we'll do a wrap up and Matt and I will answer any remaining questions and deal with anything else. So don't feel like you have to ask every question right this minute, and that if you don't, you're missing out. Matt and I are really going to get into sensory diet or a sensory plan so that you guys can have all of the information to set this up properly and have a good plan for your child.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Samantha wants to know, how do you start a sensory diet if you do not have an OT?
I would go to an OT first, try to find one in school if your son's in school. There's no harm in asking and talking, trying to find somebody, or you can get free consultations, I'm sure. It kind of depends.
They have an IEP. They should have been, for an IEP, they should have been assessed.
Definitely if they have an IEP or a 504, you could, even if they don't, if there's an OT in your school district, you can always approach them and say, hey, I'm seeing some things with my kid. Can you tell me a bit more about sensory diet? Most people are more than happy to share their knowledge. You can also, I would start there. I would start with consulting with a doctor or an OT or, excuse me, or even a speech therapist too.
Right. And there's also the options of, you said doctor, but a behavioral and the specialists who diagnose autism, they're also a really great resource.
Sure.
As well.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, of course, we have a question that is difficult to answer because it is my husband's. Would there be a good way to introduce ABA to a sensory diet?
I look at, when I say sensory, I don't go to the cognitive, right? Really. If you think about it, so my sensory diet is I get up and I exercise. There's nothing cognitive about that. I'm just getting body input. You can use things like how does your engine run, and there are programs to help with that. I'm in the blue zone, green zone, yellow zone. Those are all great, and if they work, fantastic. Our kids get a lot of cognitive strategies, and I feel like there's less emphasis put on just the sensory input and movement. When I say movement, we can talk more about that next week. But that's kind of when we talk about the actual activities you're doing, and you'll understand it's not really so much a cognitive approach. I'm not teaching anything. I'm just giving kids a movement break and having them use their hands. Sometimes it's just sitting down talking to another person. That could be part of their sensory diet. Sitting in a small space, taking a break. We all do these things. We all stand up when we take a walk. I'm not actually teaching myself anything, whereas ABA, applied behavior analysis, they're teaching behaviors. It's different. It's in a different box. So I would say kind of go. It's a bottom up approach. We're going inside out. That sounds weird when I say it like that, but that's what my mind thinks of when I think of it. Did that answer?
And he likes to ask questions that are difficult to answer. He's sitting beside me, smiling right now. And I want to say that one of the things that Riley's school does that I am absolutely in love with is brain breaks. When she notices the class is starting to get a little antsy, a little talkative, she'll stop everything, put them on the carpet, and then play a short video. Usually it's a song that comes with a dance. Like, remember that old song, What Does the Fox Say? Well, they would do the movements to that song and sing that song, and it would give them that sensory input so that she can later then put them back at their seats and get them back on track.
Yeah, that's great. Incorporating movement into the classroom, if, you know, a lot of it's having dynamic seating or active seating, and that's all part of it. It's just a lot of it is very, very 95% of it is movement based, and my body's getting to be able to move. And whereas the kids need to move anyway, we're moving less as a culture. That's a whole other topic we can talk about. But when that affects our learning, right? We all do. You know, I'm tapping my foot right now because I've been sitting for a long time, so I'm getting antsy. I need a movement break in a minute. When we're done with this,
I have this on my lap that I'm actually working my arm on moving.
There you go.
And another thing that's really cool that some schools are starting to adopt that I fell in love with, I'll try and get some pictures and post them in group tonight, but the hallways with the different movements. I don't know if you've seen them, Matt. But
yeah. I've designed a few in some gymnasiums. Yeah, they're obstacle courses and visual obstacle courses through the hallways. I think they're fantastic. Stuff like that it's promoting movement. It's promoting getting back in touch with your body. So when you're done, now I'm in a better place of learning. Right. And again, and then so there's these generic things you can totally do and have these tools and all this stuff. The best thing is to know your kid. And I see a question on there. Samantha, I see you're asking about not having access to an OT. They don't have an IEP. But finding out other ways to find out more about your kid's sensory needs. And I guess we could talk. Let me look into that. It's something I can look into. What do you do if your kid doesn't have resources at school?
And not only that, Melinda, you're asking about what products you can use for sensory diet. Not next week, but the week after, 2 weeks from today, Matt and I are actually going to sit down, and Matt's going to be in his gym with one of his children, and he's going to show you both products you can purchase and things that you can use around the house.
It should be interesting. Really
so in 2 weeks, Matt will actually work through some of the movements so that we can not only hear, oh, go do this, but we can see how Matt introduces it and how Matt works it into their daily schedule. Now, Jason wants to bring up Chris's question that somehow got skipped. What about oral sensory needs?
Oral motor, I think, is extremely important and awesome. And I could spend a long time talking about oral motor. But yeah, so having candy to suck on or gum is a great is an oral motor activity you can do, and that getting a ton of input in your jaw, these great big strong jaw muscles that have all these mechanoreceptors, is a great way for a kid to get some input while they're sitting down doing a math test or whatever. Blowing bubbles in a straw or drinking through a straw is another way that maybe that's part of your sensory diet. Let the kid drink out of a straw.
And those
environmental friendly
those silicone straws are good for them to chew on.
Yes, in fact, I just had one. Here I have a small one in my hand. It's kind of this is actually a chew I use for my kids' braces, but something like that they can chew on, something chewy that they can be chewery, stuff like that, to where it's acceptable.
I don't have it with me, but Riley has jewelry in her room. I wish I had brought one out, and that's another great thing for that oral sensory. We actually bought a 6-pack, and it comes with all different textures. And I really love that. Each one was slightly different.
Yeah, and that's, when we talk about movement breaks, that's a movement break. And maybe that's something you talk about with you find out more about that, you talk about it with your teacher. My kid needs a movement break, but movement breaks sometimes can be disruptive to the class. The teacher doesn't know how to manage them. So then, great, oral motor. It's a great way to get that movement.
Riley was listening and watching, so she just came running down the hall.
Perfect.
This is one of her jewelry. This is the most textured one. It's, as you can see, it's got a little bit of texture, but these have become an amazing source for her. She has them in her book bag. She wears them. They are great. Shell, you can't do gum, but suckers work. I agree. If you can't do gum, there are suckers. We actually would use suckers to get Riley to open her mouth when she was in speech therapy. She wouldn't open her mouth, so the speech therapist would use the sucker to get her to open her mouth and put her mouth in different shapes. So that was a really great thing to do. Now, unfortunately, folks, we are past our time, but tonight was great. Like I said, don't worry about getting it all in tonight. Matt and I will be back. This is a month-long topic that we really want to make sure you have a great handle on, and we can do the best we can to help you. So I want to thank you all for joining us. Matt, I want to thank you for coming and not only committing for tonight, but committing for more shows in the future to really get into a sensory diet. Matt has also written a blog for us that will be coming soon based on sensory diet or a sensory plan. And if you want to remember, if you want to subscribe for live updates, type the number 5 in the comment section now. And that will set you up so that when I go live, you'll be notified that I am live, so you never miss a live again. Also, don't forget that we do have the parent support group. It is a loving place where you can come, ask questions, get support. We have parents who vent. I do not allow it to be negative. So I really want to focus on support and loving each other as parents. And you can ask questions in there. So please check out our parent support group. Do not forget that we also have our sensory deals group where you can find some of our products on deals and whatnot. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. Matt, thank you again. I can't wait to see you again in 2 weeks.
Can I do a quick plug real quick?
You know it.
I just on my website, sensoryfitness.org, I just started a blog. I have about 4 on there. Just some sensory tips. I try to gear it towards parents for things to do at home to kind of help understand sensory needs. So check it out, sensoryfitness.org, and go to my blog.
Thank you, Jason. Jason has put the link for sensoryfitness.org in the comment section so that you can easily find it. Check it out, guys. Matt really knows what he's doing, and he doesn't just say, oh, do this, do this, do this. He actually does it and helps his children do it.
Try to.
So, and I know, and people are going to laugh, but sometimes making your own children do it is harder than helping another child.
Yes, it is. You got to be a parent first. It's hard enough.
So thank you, everyone. Remember, I will be back next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, where I will dive more into a sensory diet in 2 weeks. Matt will be back with us, where we will go over different things that you can do to put into their sensory diet or their sensory plan, and he will give you some live examples, and we will go from there. So thank you all for joining us, and remember, until next time, empower, support, and educate. Bye.
Thank you.